Exasperation with the mullahs is growing. Protests and sporadic strikes have been disrupting life in more than 80 cities for months, right across the Islamic Republic. They're mostly about corruption, incompetence and hardship, the price of fruit and veg, electricity, water. Not enough to bring down the regime, although with Donald Trump's help, you just never know. Because life for the regime and the 80 million people they rule is about to get worse. For months now, they've been bracing. In May, Trump reneged on the deal to reward Tehran with sanctions relief for limiting uranium enrichment.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
Today, Trump tweeted that the punitive sanctions will be the most biting ever imposed and that they'll be ratcheting up in November. I am asking for world peace, nothing less, he wrote. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani had dismissed a last-minute offer for negotiations, saying that if someone stands in front of his enemy and sticks a knife in while at the same time seeking talks, they should first put the knife away. He branded this psychological warfare. Trump's hawkish national security advisor denying the game plan was the overthrow of the regime.
Well, our policy is not regime change, but we want to put unprecedented pressure on the government of Iran to change its behavior. And so far, they've shown no indication they're prepared to do that.
But America's erstwhile allies in Europe, who together had helped forge the nuclear deal, beg to differ. The EU stating the agreement was crucial for global security, and Britain at one with the EU, expressing deep regret over the US decision. European companies had rushed to invest in Iran, bees to a honeypot, among them Germany's Daimler, Peugeot and Renault from France, the French oil company Total, and the European consortium Airbus, as well as the French-Italian turboprop manufacturer ATR, which managed to deliver 5 aircraft just yesterday. Today, though, Trump warning, trade with Iran and you won't trade with the US. The EU immediately instructing European companies not to comply with the US demands and promising to protect companies doing legitimate business in Iran.
We believe that it is, and it has to be, up to the Europeans in this case to decide with whom to trade with. So there is also a matter of, I would say, trade sovereignty to be protected.
But these big transnationals are tonight voting with their feet. Scores announcing their intention to pull out. So we're back to death to America, full-throttle rhetoric and crippling sanctions, with even more stringent ones still to come in November, with an embargo on Iranian oil and banking. Trump might argue that taking a tough line worked with another hostile regime and brought Kim Jong-un to the table, although quite what concessions he extracted there, far from clear. Will it work with Iran? Trump's restoration of sanctions plays into the hands of hardliners. The White House has said it's not bothered by the EU's blocking statute and says Iran's only option is to negotiate a new deal with America's self-appointed supreme dealmaker.
Well, earlier I spoke to Vali Nasser, Dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a former senior advisor at the U.S. State Department, and I started by asking him what he thinks President Trump's game plan is when it comes to Iran.
I think the president wants his own nuclear deal with Iran, and he can't have a new nuclear deal with Iran while the old nuclear deal negotiated by President Obama and the European allies and China and Russia is in effect. So first he moved out of the nuclear deal, hoping that it would collapse, and now he's imposed sanctions on Iran, which he hopes would push both Iranians and the Europeans to acknowledge that the old nuclear deal is done. And by offering to do talks with Iran, he's in fact encouraging Iran to move out of the old nuclear deal and to seriously engage him on negotiating a new deal.
I mean, Europe is trying to resist this. and is trying to legislate effectively to protect European businesses who want to continue doing business with Iran. I mean, can they do that?
Well, the Europeans are doing their best, but they haven't done enough as yet. First of all, the Europeans cannot force their own large multinational companies from moving away from Iran, because companies like Airbus or Total could be punished by the U.S. in many ways other than just sanctions. For instance, American Airlines could stop buying Airbus planes. But the more important issue is that Iran would have to be able to sell its oil in order to generate revenue with which then to engage in business with the rest of the world. And if European central banks are not able to buy Iranian oil and pay Iran with dollars or euros in return, then in effect, the Europeans are not able to provide any of the economic benefits that Iran expected from having signed a nuclear deal.
I mean, you're making it sound like the nuclear deal is dead, you know, that Donald Trump can make it so.
Well, it's going to be dead if Iran's economic benefits go down to zero. So the question is not just Europe, but Russia and China provide Iran with sufficient amount of economic benefit to keep Iran in the deal. I mean, a deal can't survive if one side does its part and the other side doesn't.
And what will happen in Iran if these sanctions effectively start to bite? And what will happen to the stability of the Iranian government?
Well, the sanctions had already been impacting Iran's economy for the past number of months. In other words, once President Trump announced that he was coming out of the deal, most investments stopped going to Iran in anticipation of fresh sanctions, and capital started leaving Iran, which that's why it led to the collapse of the currency. The sanctions that came into effect yesterday merely makes it impossible to even do small-scale trade, whether it's pistachios or cars. So the effect on the Iranian economy is quite significant. Now, whether this translates into mass uprising is an open question. But I think the Iranian government is very alert to the fact that this is going to cause instability.
How do you think this is going to play out?
I think there is a chance that Iran and the United States will engage at some level, they will, we might end up seeing a North Korea scenario, that pressure ultimately leads to a whole new diplomatic path. Whether that leads to a new deal is a whole different question, but it's possible to see engagement happening. And I think it's a big deal that the North Korea summit in Singapore happened in early summer. So the Iranians have a model, both Iranian public and the Iranian government have a model that perhaps it is possible to engage President Trump, that it might yield positive results for Iran in the short run, and it's not as a taboo as it would have been before the U.S. had met with North Korea.
Vali Nasser, thank you very much.
Thank you.